You know that feeling when you're on a phone call and you hear a weird click or echo and you wonder if someone's listening? Yeah, imagine that. Except it's not paranoia. It's Mrs. Henderson from Three Houses Down, and she's absolutely listening to your conversation, and there's nothing you can do about it. Let me paint you a picture. It's 1952. You pick up your telephone, heavy black thing, weighs about 5 pounds, and before you can even dial, you hear voices. Two women talking about someone's daughter who's apparently pregnant and unmarried, which is apparently the scandal of the century. You need to make a call. It's important, but these women won't shut up, so you clear your throat loudly. One of them pauses mid-sentence, says, "Someone's on the line," and they both hang up. Finally, you start to dial your number, get halfway through, and suddenly there's another voice. "I need to make an emergency call." Is it actually an emergency? Probably not. But you hang up anyway because that's the rule. Emergency calls get priority. Welcome to the party line era, where your phone wasn't really yours, where privacy was a suggestion, not a guarantee, where 8 families shared the same telephone line and could hear everything you said. And here's what nobody tells you about this system. It didn't just invade privacy, it fundamentally changed how people communicated, what they were willing to say out loud, and how communities functioned. This isn't a cute story about simpler times. This is a story about what happens when technology forces you to share your most intimate conversations with people you might actively hate. But there's something even stranger happening beneath the surface. Here's what you need to understand. The telephone was supposed to be for rich people. When Alexander Graham Bell patented the telephone in 1876, it was expensive, complicated, and required dedicated infrastructure. Early phone systems were basically toys for wealthy businessmen and the occasional doctor. You think phone companies would have wanted to expand access quickly, right? Get phones into every home, make communication universal? But telephone infrastructure was brutally expensive. Every phone needed its own physical wire running from the house to the telephone exchange. In cities, this meant thousands of wires crisscrossing streets and alleys. In rural areas, it meant running lines for miles to reach a single farmhouse. The phone companies did the math and realized most people couldn't afford a private line. The installation cost alone was prohibitive, and the monthly fees were more than many families spent on food. So they came up with a solution that was equal parts clever and dystopian: party lines. Instead of running 8 separate wires to 8 different houses, they'd run one wire and split it 8 ways. Each household got a phone, but they all shared the same line. Think of it like this. Imagine if your cell phone was connected to 7 other people's phones, and anytime any of them made a call, all 8 phones rang, and anyone could pick up and listen. And if someone was already on a call, you just had to wait. That's a party line. The phone companies pitched this as affordable telephone service for everyone, a way to bring modern communication to the masses. What they didn't emphasize, you were paying for a phone that you only partially controlled, and that came with 7 built-in eavesdroppers. By the 1930s and 40s, party lines were everywhere. In rural America, they were basically the only option. In suburbs, they were common. Even in some cities, working-class neighborhoods were stuck with party lines, while wealthy areas got private lines. At the peak, around 1950, more than 60% of American households with phones were on party lines. Some rural areas had 10, 15, even 20 families sharing a single line. This is where things take a turn. Let's talk about party line etiquette for a minute, because oh boy, did the phone companies create rules. Lots of rules. Rules that assumed people would be polite, considerate, and respectful of shared resources. Here were the official guidelines. Keep calls short, 3 to 5 minutes maximum. Don't listen in on others' conversations. If you pick up and the line is busy, hang up immediately. Emergency calls get absolute priority. Don't pick up the phone just to check if the line is free. Space out your calls so others have a chance to use the line. Beautiful rules, sensible rules. Rules that made perfect sense if you assumed humans were fundamentally decent and cooperative. You know what actually happened? Mrs. Patterson would stay on the phone for 45 minutes discussing her bunions with her sister while 3 other families needed to make calls. When someone would pick up to check if the line was free, she'd say, "I'll just be another minute," and then talk for 20 more. Mr. Chen would pick up the phone every time it rang, even when it wasn't his ring pattern, just to see who was calling whom. The Kowalski kids would deliberately make noise on the line during their neighbors' calls because they thought it was funny. And everyone, literally everyone, listened in on everyone else's conversations, at least occasionally. Some people did it constantly. The phone companies called these people rubbernecks. They published ads shaming them, they sent stern letters, they threatened to disconnect service. It didn't matter. The temptation was too strong. Because here's something that'll mess with you. Party lines turned your neighbors into the world's most accessible entertainment. This was before television was common, before internet, before streaming. Your neighbor's drama was basically the only show in town. Someone having an affair? You'd know about it before their spouse did. Family fighting. About money? You'd hear every detail. Teenager trying to sneak a phone call to someone their parents didn't approve of? The whole neighborhood knew by morning. And maybe that's the real psychology here. We've always been voyeurs. We've always wanted to know other people's secrets. Party lines just made it socially acceptable, or at least socially inevitable. Now, here's where the system gets truly bizarre. Since 8 families shared one line, how did you know when a call was for you? Ring patterns. Each household was assigned a specific pattern of rings. Yours might be 2 short rings. Your neighbor's might be 1 long ring. Someone else's might be 3 short rings followed by 1 long. When the phone rang, everyone's phone rang. All 8 households. You'd sit there, count the rings, and determine whether you should answer. Sounds simple, right? Except imagine you're in the middle of cooking dinner, hands covered in flour, and the phone starts ringing. 1 long ring, not yours. You go back to cooking. 2 short rings, still not yours. 3 short rings. Wait, is that 3 short or 2 short and 1 medium? Better pick up just to check. You pick up. It's for the Hendersons. You hang up, embarrassed. 5 minutes later, it rings again. 2 short rings. That's you. You pick up. It's a salesman. The phone rings maybe 30, 40 times a day. Most of those calls aren't for you, but you have to pay attention every single time because what if it is for you and you miss it? It's like having a notification system that alerts you to everyone else's notifications while also occasionally including yours. The psychological toll of this was real. People talked about party line anxiety, this constant low-level stress of monitoring every phone ring, trying to remember ring patterns, worrying about missing important calls. And then there were the people who just picked up anyway. Some folks would pick up on every ring, regardless of pattern, just to see who was calling. When you'd say, "This isn't your ring," they'd say, "Oh, I thought it might be for me," and then stay on the line listening anyway. The phone company couldn't stop them. The technology couldn't stop them. Social pressure couldn't stop them. Because the fundamental problem with party lines wasn't the technology. It was that they required humans to be better than humans actually are. But then something remarkable happens. Here's what rarely gets acknowledged about party lines. They created a 2-tier system of privacy. If you were wealthy, you got a private line. Your conversations were yours. Nobody listening, nobody waiting. Complete control. If you were poor or rural, you got a party line. Your conversations were community property. Your emergencies had to compete with Mrs. Anderson's gossip session. Your intimate moments had witnesses. Privacy became something you could buy, and if you couldn't afford it, you simply didn't have it. Think about what that means for a second. You're a young woman trying to call a doctor about a pregnancy scare. Do you want 7 neighbors potentially listening? You're a man trying to discuss financial troubles with your brother. Do you want the whole party line knowing you might lose your house? You're anyone trying to have any conversation that requires discretion, vulnerability, or honesty. And there's a non-zero chance that multiple people are listening, judging, and will definitely tell other people what they heard. So what did people do? They started speaking in code, euphemisms, vague references that only the person on the other end would understand. They'd say the situation we discussed instead of naming it. The problem from last week instead of being specific. Entire conversations became exercises in ambiguity, or they'd drive to a payphone, even though they had a phone at home, because a payphone, ironically, offered more privacy than the telephone in their living room. Or they just stopped using the phone for anything important, went back to letters, in-person visits, anything to avoid having witnesses to their private business. The irony is almost painful. The telephone was supposed to bring people closer together, make communication easier, collapse distance. Instead, party lines made people more guarded, more secretive, more distant, even from the people they were talking to because they knew others were listening. Let's talk about what happened when party lines weren't just annoying, when they became dangerous. Because here's the thing about shared phone lines, they could be weaponized. Domestic abusers would monitor their partner's calls, listening in to control who they talk to. If a woman tried to call family or friends for help, her husband could pick up the extension and hear everything. Some men would threaten violence if their wives used the phone at all. Bullies would deliberately tie up the line for hours, preventing specific families from making or receiving calls. There are documented cases of neighbors using party line monopolization as a harassment tactic, making someone's phone essentially useless for days or weeks. Blackmailers had a field day. Overhear something incriminating or embarrassing on a party line call? That's leverage. Small town blackmail schemes were often built entirely on information gathered from party line eavesdropping, and then there were the medical emergencies. A child has a seizure? You pick up the phone to call the doctor. The line is busy. Someone's talking about a church fundraiser. You interrupt. This is an emergency. I need the line. They say, I'll just be one more minute. That minute becomes 5 minutes, 10 minutes. By the time you get through to the doctor, by the time the doctor arrives, it might be too late. This happened repeatedly. There are records of people dying or suffering permanent injury because party line users wouldn't yield the line during emergencies. The phone companies tried to solve this with emergency override policies, but they required the cooperation of whoever was on the line, and some people simply refused to cooperate. You'd think community shame would handle it, right? That neighbors would police each other's behavior? Sometimes they did. But sometimes the person hogging the line was also the person everyone was afraid of. The town gossip who knew everyone's secrets, the powerful family who owned the local business, the person you couldn't afford to anger. Party lines didn't just lack privacy. They created power dynamics based on who was willing to be the biggest asshole. Now here's something that might surprise you. The death of party lines was slower than you'd think. Private lines started becoming more common in the 1950s. By the 1960s, they were standard in most urban and suburban areas, but rural party lines persisted well into the 1970s. Some areas of the country still had party lines into the 1990s. The last party line in the United States was disconnected in 1991. Technology didn't kill party lines overnight. It was a gradual process of infrastructure improvement, fiber optic cables, digital switching systems that made individual lines cheaper to maintain. And as private lines became available, people fled party lines as fast as they could afford to. Because despite all the nostalgia you sometimes hear about party lines, the community aspect, the way everyone stayed connected, the reality is that people hated them. They hated the lack of privacy, the constant interruptions, the neighbors who listened in, the anxiety of waiting for the line to free up, the emergencies that couldn't get through. When people got private lines, they celebrated. They called everyone they knew and said, I have my own line now, like they'd been released from prison. And we got what we wanted. Private lines, cell phones, smartphones, complete control over our communications. You can send a message to anyone, anywhere, anytime. Nobody's listening, nobody's interrupting, nobody's judging. Except now we have the opposite problem. We're so private, so isolated in our individual communication bubbles that we've lost any sense of community accountability. You can say anything to anyone with zero witnesses. Cyberbullying, harassment, scams all happen in private conversations where nobody else can see or intervene. The party line had too much community oversight. Modern communication has none. Party lines forced you to share your life with neighbors you might not even like. Smartphones let you ignore neighbors you live 10 feet away from. Neither system is good. One invaded privacy. The other enables isolation, and maybe that's the real story here, not just about party lines or telephone technology, but about the impossible balance between privacy and community, between wanting to be left alone and wanting to be part of something larger. Party lines went too far in one direction. We've swung too far in the other. Those women chatting for hours about neighborhood drama, Annoying as they were also maintaining social connections. They knew when someone was sick, when someone needed help, when something was wrong. Now you could live next to someone for years and never know their name. The Kowalski kids listening in on calls, invasive as it was, meant that when old Mr. Kowalski had a heart attack, the whole neighborhood knew within an hour and showed up to help. Now you could die in your apartment and nobody would notice for weeks. I'm not saying we should go back. Party lines were genuinely terrible in many ways. The lack of privacy enabled abuse. The system was frustrating and outdated. But maybe we should remember what we traded. We traded knowing too much about our neighbors for knowing nothing. We traded annoying interruptions for complete disconnection. We traded community oversight for isolation. The next time you're texting someone who lives in the same building as you instead of just walking over and talking to them, the next time you're on your fourth hour of scrolling through strangers' lives on social media while having no idea what's happening with the people on your street, the next time you're completely alone in a crowd of people all staring at their phones. Remember, there used to be a system where you couldn't ignore your neighbors even if you wanted to, where community was enforced by technology, not by choice. It was invasive, annoying, often terrible, but it was community. And we don't really have that anymore. That's not just history. That's the sound of the line going dead. If this made you think about how we communicate, how we've isolated ourselves in the name of privacy, stick around because there are 1,000 more stories like this. Systems we abandoned that maybe we shouldn't have completely forgotten.